So first of all, thank you, Yasmin. It's great to go through the presentation. I think I spent 2 hours with Yasmin a couple of days ago, and every time I meet her, my head spins when I leave. There's so much going on, and it's really incredible to see how this vision of Icon became such an amazing reality in just a decade. So thank you. First of all, I'm very excited to have Yaron with us today. He actually not only flew in just to spend the evening with us, he did it on his birthday, which is particularly exciting.
Thank you.
Happy birthday.
Thank you.
Can you do it in Danish, Yasmin? Yeah, it's hard. I tried to say it as well. It's hard. I thought about what's the best way to introduce Yaron, and I thought maybe I'll start with my personal story of how I got to meet him and how we became friends. And it goes back about 7 years ago. I was in Denmark. I was actually fundraising, and folks invited me to meet the former, at the time, the CEO of Lego. And it's like, oh, it's cool. It's a toy company, and obviously I grew up on Lego, but it wasn't, I didn't have a sort of, I think, the same emotional relationship with Lego that many of the people that I met in the audience had. But I remember coming out of the meeting so inspired. I felt like I met somebody who didn't just lead the toy company. I felt like I met someone who constantly is thinking about how he's educating the next generation of entrepreneurship, of entrepreneurs, of engineers, of technologies that are going to change the world. And his vision was really coming to reality through the work he was doing. And I decided at that time that I'm going to be very good friends with Jorgen over the next decade. And fortunately, he agreed. And so over the next few years, we built a relationship. And again, I found somebody who was not only a very successful business person, I found somebody who had a deep vision about the world, who wanted to do good in the world. It was also fun, engaging, and constantly curious. He always wanted to learn more. He would come here, we would spend time talking about technology, and he would tell me about how Lego is expanding into China and taking over the world and innovating in so many different areas. And it was always inspiring for me. So I was very excited when just a year ago, he decided to also join us as a partner and executive advisor to the firm. Maybe a few words about sort of Jorgen's career, which I feel like is very unusual. He actually started his career as a kindergarten teacher, then decided at some point he wanted to become an economist, and so went to study economics. And so he got his PhD in economics, was a professor for a period of time, before he wanted to sort of play in this thing called business. So he went to McKinsey, became a consultant, started working on different projects. This is, I think, pre-2000, right? And one of the projects he got was Lego. So Lego at the time was a failing business. It was a well-known brand, but it just didn't work. The business was failing. He's going to talk more about it later. It was failing so bad such that it was going to go bankrupt if nothing happened. And Jorgen, at the time when he was at McKinsey, did a project with the Lego family, it's still a family business. And he did such a good job, and I think he did such a honest job in actually telling them that the business was failing, that I think they were not used to hearing the truth. And they got excited about this young fellow who was 35 at the time, telling them the truth about what they could do differently, and they decided to offer him the CEO job. Mind you, he was 35, he didn't have any operating background, and they still offered it to him, and he still decided to take it, which we're going to talk about later as well. And over the next 15 years as a CEO, he really changed the business. He changed actually very quickly. He became very, very profitable, and it also became one of the most iconic brands in the world. I think the brand that we all know today and love today. And so I wanted to spend the conversation today just really hearing more about Jorgen. I wanted to hear more about the story of Lego, and hopefully, I think, provide some inspiration to all the amazing entrepreneurs and executives that we have in the audience today. So again, thank you for joining, and maybe we'll get started. I thought we should get started I thought about initially starting with the early Lego days, but we had the conversation with Amir Feintuch just before, and you talked about being lost and found, and sort of maybe, I'd be curious to hear more about your early career, being a kindergarten teacher, sort of the early building blocks of who you are today. So I would love to get maybe a little bit of that as we get started. Can you share a little bit about those days?
Yeah, I would go back to my sort of K-8, I think it'd be called in the US, but like elementary school, I was very lucky because I was born such that I had the first generation of teachers who were sort of the hippie teachers, you know, the flower children, so to speak, of the flower child generation, and we would call them by their first name. And my teacher was called Peter, and he came into the classroom and he said, "I just want you to know, I'm only here to make enough money to travel to Tahiti and become a full-time painter." And my parents were very desperate because I didn't learn very much sort of a formal schooling because I spent more time looking out the window than on the blackboard. And when I was in 5th grade, they said to him, "We're really worried because our son is not really progressing on spelling and such things." And he said, "No, but what does he do when he goes sledging in the snow?" And they said, "Well, he'll draw a painting of where he's gone to." "Yes, he's such a creative young man. He can just draw things instead of spelling them." So he gave me this incredible opportunity to succeed in a different way, and I ended up doing okay at the end of elementary school. But actually, when I finished high school, in a very tiny country, I graduated with the best high school exam. And I think I got interested in learning intrinsically instead of extrinsically. So he gave me the inspiration that we learn in very different ways. We're very different, but getting engagement, getting interest, getting curiosity from the inside is transformational. And so that's why I really got captivated by the idea of kindergarten, because I thought this is going to be amazing to be able to give that to another child that had been given to me. And I did that for a couple of years, and then I also was lucky I could go to Japan. I had won a prize, and I really wanted to understand Japan. I wanted to understand China. I ended up in China just at Tiananmen Square and all the chaos at that time. And so I decided, okay, maybe I can become a teacher in something related to that. And the only place I could do that was by studying economics. So I ended up there. I ended up teaching and doing research. And then McKinsey said to me, if you really want to be a good researcher and teacher, you have to get some clinical practice. You got to come do some real work, which of course McKinsey isn't, but that's what they told me. And so I did that, just kind of like a medical doctor getting some training. And so I think that I had that always this desire to try to do something that could make other people grow. And I was never intended to become a business executive. I started a bookshop when I was at the economics faculty because I was so frustrated with the pricing, but I gave it away. It's still in existence. And so I just really was more driven by this intellectual curiosity. So when I came to Lego, I thought that people wanted to hear the truth. I realized, of course, later, it's very naive, that there's a family owner, he was the CEO, but in reality there was a COO and an executive team really running the company, and it was run very poorly. And I spent a year or so figuring out how poorly it was run, like, supply chain would measure forecast error this way, the markets would do it in a different way, they didn't even communicate. So I wrote a paper that started with, at that time it was popular to know of Jack Welch, and there's a quote, that the first principle of reality is to say things as they are. So that's a good quote. And then I wrote a paper about things as exactly as they were, at least as I saw them. And I thought that's what people wanted. And the board was stunned, and the daily leader of the company leaned over to me and he said, smoking his pipe, they did that in the boardrooms back then. He said, "You must have some really big balls." And I didn't really know what was going on. The family owner came over and said, "Nobody's ever talked to me like this before. Thank you." So I was later told that the whole management team had said, "This guy needs to get fired." And the family owner vetoed that and said, "No, I need this person to do that." So I think I was with a guy that Innovation Endeavors also knows, Scott Bonham, and he took me to an event up in the forests of north of Toronto last summer. And he introduced me as the Ted Lasso of business. I'd never watched Ted Lasso, but when I watched the show, I was like, yeah, okay, I get it. I don't know anything about business. So I ended up by accident in that, and so I guess that that gave me another take on how to do it.
Amazing. I want to hear more about the early days of Lego. So first of all, you're 35, you're being offered this job, you have no relevant background whatsoever to actually run the company. It was a fairly big company at the time. Not successful, but very big.
Yeah.
What inspired you to take this challenge? And also, curious about sort of the first steps that you took in sort of coming into this functional company and turning it around.
Well, I mean, I sort of was sliding into it. It wasn't just from, I was working there for a little while, helping them on various issues. So I felt like I had a good grasp of what was the problem. And then suddenly, just more, and I was just asked to do more and more, and suddenly I was tasked with coming up with this plan. And I just said to myself that regardless of what happens from here on, I'll never regret giving it a shot. So I felt kind of risk-free, and then the national newspapers in a small country of 5 million people basically ran the headline, "Idiot named to become head of a completely inexperienced idiot." And of course that was kind of weird, not weird, very understandable, but it turned out to be a saving grace, because I could then say to people, I'm not sure I know the answer. What do you think the answer is? And it sort of strikes me, because I've been part of nominating CEOs in other companies, and I can see most CEOs come to the stage and say, "Hey, I know what to do here. Trust me, this is how it should be done." And I didn't have that on my shoulder. I could say, okay, let's ask the employees, let's ask the users, let's ask the parents, let's ask the children, let's ask the customers. And so I found myself over a couple of years triangulating the key answers. And I used people that got recommended to me that I could talk to, who gave me a sense of what the problem might be. And that became a huge evolution on so many fronts for me. So to give you some specifics you can take away from that is that I on my first day in the job, the family owner said to me, "You need to meet this group called LOGNET, Lego User Group Network." This was before Facebook. And it was my first day in the office, and they said, "We want to understand why you have retired old gray." That's a specific color in the Lego building system, which I had rationalized because there were too many colors. And now they could no longer build these beautiful castles and so on. But it gave me an understanding that there were people that were so passionate that they were interested enough in the color schemes and so on. And so I said to them, "How do you guys meet?" "Well, we have a conference in Washington, D.C. next summer." So I traveled over with my kids. At that time I had 3, and with the family owner. And we spent 4 days in the sweltering heat of the summer in Washington, D.C. and just sat in workshops with these people whose whole life was about Lego. They were so passionate about it. And then, of course, spent time in families and with customers all over the world. But at the time, I came also to Arkansas. Lee Scott was the CEO of Walmart at the time, and we were not going to meet Lee Scott because we were not yet such a big company. But the person who was the toy buyer said, if you look like you're interested in understanding how Walmart operates, and I got lectured on shelf turnover and speed of margin generation, all sorts of stuff that I was practicing and talking about. He said, "You should come to this, you spoke about the Saturday meeting. I heard about these Saturday meetings." So I came to the Saturday meeting, and Lee Scott was kind enough to acknowledge we have guests here from Lego, and we enjoyed it. It was an amazing experience. And then it was over, and he said, "Hey, you're the Lego guy." Yeah, I came down and spoke to him. He said, first of all, my wife is Danish. Do you know this particular inn in Aarhus where we got married? I said, "Yeah, I do know that place very well." So we had a nice talk. And then he said, I have a 20-year-old nephew, and he's got real learning challenges, but Lego is the biggest thing in his life, and he gains so much from it. And I said, "Oh, yes, but that's because," and then I gave him everything I've learned about how it brings learning through play. And then he said, "I just don't understand. Here you are at Walmart, the world's greatest retailer, and you don't even talk about that." But before I traveled to Arkansas, my team said, "It's very nice what you tell us at these events, but please don't talk about that at Walmart." So I just said to the team, "It's over. From now on, every retailer I meet, we're going to talk about the values and our mission in life." So in that way, not having the answer, but then hearing it from people allowed me to triangulate and find some of the core answers.
That's perfect. I want to hear more about the early days, sort of, and also the transition from sort of a failing company to a successful company. So curious, A, what surprised you the most in the early days?
Yeah.
And B, if you look back at sort of the 2 or 3 most important things you've done that you think have contributed the most to the success of the company following that, what were they?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So most people told me at the time the Lego brick is dead. It's over. It's so old. It's something that belongs before 2000. It was very popular back then. You should forget all about that and move to video games, that it was called at the time, or something else. I was very, very seriously considering that. And where I ended up after speaking to all these bunch of people was that there was still some kind of core group of people who were very passionate about the Lego brick. And I actually used what you know from my PhD in sort of microeconomics. What is a valuable good? It's something that's highly relevant, something that's valuable to people, but also something that's actually hard to imitate and therefore quite rare. And so the only thing I could find of everything Lego did was the brick, the building system it's a part of, the brand, of course, and then this community of fans. So I went to the board and I said, we're going to build the company around those 4 things. And I don't know how big the company will be. And the board was like, well, you got to have an idea. It's got to be, is it going to be $2 billion, $5 billion? I said, I really don't know. Because they said, you must have benchmarks. I said, there's no benchmark. There's no other product like that. It's the only material in the world that you can build anything you can imagine from it, and yet you can easily take it apart again. It's completely unique material. But how big the market is, I have no idea. And what I learned from talking to a lot of kids was they said, I used to love Lego, but it's no longer Lego. So Lego, in its attempt to be relevant to a bigger audience, had let go of the original building experience. There was less building. Some of you might remember the period where the bricks got bigger, or the lure was sort of, oh, you don't have to build so much, and then you get a Lego product. So it's kind of like if you make coffee and then you kind of dilute the specialness of the coffee. And so I discovered we needed to go hardcore back to what we had originally been about, but in an updated version. And I had no idea where it would go from there, but I think what that taught me and surprised me is that every great company, I think, starts with a revolutionary idea. I was just at this other event today where Jensen Huang was talking, and he said, I only want to do things that's almost impossible. I don't want to do what everybody else is doing. And so I think if you think about a lot of great brands, a lot of great companies that had sort of a revolutionary idea or quite unique idea. So I wanted to get back to that. Then clearly the product was not as fashionable as it had been, so we needed to figure out what was wrong with that. The adult fans actually helped us a lot with that. At the time, about a couple of % of sales went out to grown-ups, to adults. Today it's 50% of the business. And the business is 10 times bigger than it was back then.
I think half of that is my wife. She's in the audience.
Yeah. So the other thing was that it turned out, I had this idealistic vision that with Lego, you can build anything you can imagine. So the free build is the core experience. That turns out not to be the case. It's important, but what people really love is to get a great building instruction and then make something amazing. In my marketing talk, I would say it allows ordinary people like myself to create extraordinary things. It's actually like playing the piano. You can just hammer the keys, or you can play Chopin. Or if you have the skills and aptitude to it, maybe you make your own music, and all of that is possible. So we discovered that we needed an amazing building instructions team. So we doubled down on that and made the building instructions significantly better. And what I took away from that is, when you move from idea to product, you don't know what's right. And there's no analytical answer to that question. There's only an experiential. You try, you test, you learn.
Maybe you could mention the flowers. example?
The flowers is a great example. So one of the things we introduced in 2008 was Lego Ideas, and people can suggest ideas and so on. And
maybe before you do that, how many of you have played with the Lego flowers and built them?
Quite a few, I can see.
Amazing.
And some...
Did you know it's going to be that successful?
I had no idea. So what happened is that some fans were making Lego flowers, and I was like, oh, that's good, it's funny, and nobody really wants that. And then we built an amazing place you should all come visit called the Lego House, which is sort of our brand house. It's an architectural marvel, and inside it's an experience of all our values and Lego play and so on. And we had Lego flowers in one of the sections there. And I remember walking there with my wife, and she said, those flowers are amazing. You should really make a product like that. Honey, you don't understand. Nobody wants to do that. So finally in Lego Ideas, another set came out, it was successful. And actually last year, the Lego bouquet of roses was our best-selling product worldwide. And it has activated a new kind of adult users, particularly women, who used to not build so much with Lego. So there's just no way you could have, well, I mean, maybe there was a way you could have analyzed yourself, but I think you have to experience it. The fourth element, I think, is sort of that you need to think about the culture with which you deliver your product. And the culture at Lego was either very sort of, some people called them religious, believing in the values and the purpose of the brand. This sort of with endless creativity and yet a very structured, systematic fashion that explains the learning, or those who were commercial realists. And what we were looking to accomplish is actually building a culture where you're both. The purpose of the brand is in your belly, you burn for it, and every day you believe in it, and yet, of course, you also have to deliver commercially. And so we created something we called the brand framework with a planet promise, a people promise, a play promise. So something to live up to and make it very clear that we're for real. It's an authentic company. And I think that has created this brand that is actually today, I was just sharing with somebody, among parents of children up to 12 years old, it's the most trusted and highly revered brand. Stronger than Apple, stronger than Nike, stronger than Netflix, stronger than YouTube. And I think it's that kind of authenticity in the delivery that underscores that.
Wow. I would love to actually expand on the culture and the leadership style. So obviously you joined at a time of war, company was failing, you had to fix things very quickly, and then over the period of time where you were CEO, the company grew quite a bit, became very successful. Did you change your leadership style along the way? Did you change the culture along the way? Did it stay the same?
Yeah, I think in the beginning, obviously I was super inexperienced. I think I was lucky in one thing, and that is I'm pretty good at execution, and I think that's just, I don't know, I'm just somebody who can get things done. But I was not very good at sort of articulating strategic intent to other people and so on. And I was very lucky. I had a super strong CFO that I was lucky to. He said I cheated him. I didn't tell him how bad it was. He was a very good CFO. And he listened to me. And of course, I'd spent a little time at McKinsey. So I sort of, what do we call the next plan? Survive to grow, or grow to become fit. And he just looked at me and he said, you don't know what to do. Why don't we just call it an action plan? I was like, deflated action plan. And then he was trying to give me some energy, and he said, this problem never does what it says it does. So if we make an action plan, people can see we actually deliver. And so that was a huge learning experience for me, because so everything we did from that moment and on, which was strategy, is only what we do, not what we talk about. So no talk, just doing and demonstrating, constantly delivering on it. And that's become very, very central to me. So I think that part was very important in the beginning. And I think where we were was like if you were in a hospital, we were somebody who just had an accident and we were bleeding, we were almost dying. So we spent actually 18 months in that kind of condition. And then we actually spent another couple of years just to get fit before we were able to truly compete. So instead of growing quickly, we were fixing ourselves, and we were really figuring out what business we were in, what's the business model, how do we do this, like this thing with the building instructions and everything, what kind of product, and then how do you create a really phenomenal operating model. And a lot of people sort of ask me, what do you mean operating model? Isn't that the same as a business model? And I can use the example of Starbucks coffee, is that obviously the business model is to sell premium coffee, but the front of the store is a theater, the back of the store is a factory. And how do you make that factory really function is that you do have platforms, because there are so many customizations. And the same was true of Lego, and I had a real genius that I worked with for 13 years in the supply chain of Lego, and half of the extraordinary profitability of the company today is because we really optimized the operating model, and it continues to be rigorously managed. So that's not some sort of artisanal thing, and we'll just make, if you are a product developer at Lego, you're supposed to be endlessly creative, but everything you pick in the Element kitchen has a different price point. And that price point depends on how common the element is, what other colors we use of that, how much is on inventory, and what's the risk profile for quickly replenishing the product if it sells really fast. So there's like a real rigorous, obviously data-driven operating model that makes the company infinitely successful.
Yeah, and over the summer, we actually spent time with my family in Billund, where the Lego house is, and spent some time in a manufacturing facility. And it was almost like a 21st century manufacturing facility. Everything was robotics driven. Supply chain seems to be very precise. It was pretty amazing to see how much technology went into that.
I used to say, that it's like a Stalinistic communist economy, right? Like we say, the difference between communism and market economy is that nobody's coordinating. People just make bread and they buy it if they want it, and the consumers will. But Lego, we do 150 billion elements in about 20,000 variations of color, of shape, where in 8 weeks, half of the demand is sold. Wow. So that's the optimization algorithm that you need to run. And because you're doing it internally, you're basically telling the machines and the factories what to produce. So getting that right is an interesting data problem.
I want to hear more about the growth. So obviously you moved from a state of war to like peace, but also aggressively growing, and you expanded. When you moved into media, movies, gaming, you invested a lot of money in Epic and other companies. I know you spent a lot of time thinking about how do you do all that while maintaining the core strategy and the core identity of the company. Can you talk more about that?
Yeah. So as I said, there's a revolutionary idea, and for me, the idea is learning through play, but it's also learning through play in that there's a system that allows you modularly to make things, so you can easily take it apart and easily reconfigure. And so, in a sense, the Lego brick and building system is an app that's running on the Lego idea. And so other things can be done on the Lego idea. Theme parks, video games, Minecraft, of course not created by us, but it's a brilliant example of doing an app on that idea. So what we started exploring was, okay, we need to protect the core company, but are there other applications that can run on the same idea in education, in theme parks, at retail, in video games or digital play? And that's what we did. But the big lesson for us was, let's not pollute the core company with that idea, because if you understand what a company like Epic Games, that we are a big investor in, how they develop, and currently they have a game out called Lego Fortnite and so on, amazing experience. But like the operating model and the culture of that company is so different from what it is to make Lego bricks. And it dawned upon me really when we started making movies, because it's like being the author of a great book and then saying, oh, I'm also the one who can turn that great book into a movie script and actually direct a movie, although I've never done it before. And so I think our journey has been one that's given me intense respect for how difficult it is to actually do something you rarely do. Like, expertise comes from doing it a million times.
Thank you. I wanted to switch gears a little bit and talk about the global environment that we are in. And obviously, Lego is a very global company, both in terms of selling all around the world, but really have employees now all around the world as well. You're also on the board of Starbucks, which is obviously known to be operating around the world. But I think specifically also, you've also acquired an Israeli company. When was that? A couple of years ago?
Yeah, 2000.
BrainPop.
Yeah, BrainPop.
Curious about your lessons learned from managing those sort of global organization with it's very diverse. And specifically, I would love to get your thoughts on working within the Israeli environment as well.
Yes, love to talk about that. I mean, I think the big lesson is that every country says America first, or whatever their nation is called. So when we are active in China, we're not in, like we want to win China or we want to make a profit in China. We're in China to win for China. We're there to help China develop the modern students who can be creative and thoughtful and ask critical questions. And in America, a lot of people think Lego is really American, like Rubbermaid or something like that. And in Germany, they all say, oh, it's really a good example of our precision industry. And in Sweden, they say, oh, it's like IKEA, we're so creative. And I just stay quiet. So I think that the secret is not to be American or not to be Danish, but to be whatever that country wants. And that's also how we come to Israel, and tremendous respect for the tech environment in Israel. I think the tech industry of Israel is as valuable as the entire tech industry of Europe. And so it's a very natural thing for us to have a developer team there and be able to access that job market and the capabilities that are present there. It gives us tremendous understanding. And then the other thing that also came with BrainPop, which is a Jewish, American, Israeli company, we had Jewish communities, of course, in the company. I had about 7 years earlier hired a Canadian/East European Jewish leader who headed up our people function, and I hired a Russian Jewish lady who had immigrated to the US and became the head of our product development. But I realized we had never really sort of understood what is the role of Jewish religion in our brand and in our company, and that became very clear with BrainPop. So I think it's opened our eyes in many meaningful ways.
I wanted to speak about mentorship. You've been an incredible mentor to me, and I know you've been mentoring some of the best CEOs in the world now. And I'm curious about who were the best mentors or leaders that have really helped you along the way, and how did they shape your approach to leadership?
Yeah, it's a good question. I strive very hard to be that, but I think again, it's you also want to work with people who are willing to be vulnerable. You want to work with people who are willing to be curious, to not think they're perfect, and still have the confidence to actually be imperfect. But I was lucky to get to expose to people who had really original ideas, like Ram Charan, who's written many books about execution and so on. And he taught me what he calls a social operating mechanism. The way it worked was our factories were broken, our marketing people didn't talk together. So with this friend who was a real genius of our operating model, we created something called Visual Factory. And that was Friday morning, 7 a.m. And then we went through the whole supply and all their machines and so on. But it was all in the computer systems. We used SAP at the time. But he said, no, we're going to write the numbers on the board. And people were like, well, that's highly ineffective. But it was either green or red. And of course, what we discovered was people didn't really own the numbers. And we also discovered the leaders were like, we're not going there because that's not our job, that's our team's job. And then he said to me, I know you don't understand what they're talking about, but could you just please come and sit there on Friday morning? So I went for 2 years every Friday morning. And of course, eventually I understood how it works. But it was a nice way of saying you cannot be too operational. So like that was from Ram Charan. Then there was another guy, I met him once a quarter for 2 years in the beginning, and he said, I just want to hear 2 things. One is, why do you exist as a company and as a brand? And the other one was, what went wrong? And for 2 years, I told him it had to do with Hollywood, and the American dollar had dropped. Some of you might remember it was very strong in the early 2000s. And then finally, one summer day, I said to him, well, it's really poor management. I was so sick of repeating it. He said, drink your tea, you never need to come back again. So he wanted me to understand that you're maybe only 80% responsible for an outcome, but you got to own those 80%, and the rest of it is just external stuff. And on the why do we exist, it was very difficult for me to actually answer such a simple question. And through my triangulation of sources and so on, I ended on this thing I called systematic creativity. And that was really unique. But it took me 2 years, and he just kept drilling why do you exist? No, it doesn't make any sense. You know, like.
Well, how would you answer that today?
I would say that there is nothing like the Lego material in the world, really, that allows you in a very structured algorithmic function. I think that's why so many software engineers love Lego. It's like super structured, it's mathematical, and yet it's endlessly creative. So it's like science, it's like algorithms, and you are taught that as a child without words, because we know from neuroscience that the best way to learn something is to use your hands. So you don't learn skiing or skateboarding or biking by listening to it, but you learn it by doing it. So what you learn as you sit there and build with Lego is thinking algorithmic, structured, logical, and yet you can be endlessly creative. And I could not think of a better thing to teach a child. And that's why we say we inspire and develop the builders of tomorrow. That's the mission.
Thank you. We have about 5 minutes left, so I'll do the 2 last questions, and then we're going to open it up for Q&A. So if you have any questions, please think about it, and we're going to have time for that in a minute. So one, I wanted to ask you about your passion for learning. I think that's something that defines Lego and really defines you. And you are one of the most curious people that I know. And I'm curious, how do you stay curious? How do you integrate that into sort of your day-to-day life and into the way you work?
Yeah. So I think that very simply there are 2 things. One is, I think we've already spoken about, you know, my school and all the rest of it. And it just sort of, the other thing is that in business and in life, I'm a student, and I'm, you know, I think I must admit that for a lot of leaders, it's quite frustrating, because I think it's interesting to understand how a business works. A lot of people are more like, I don't give a shit about that. I just want to make some money. But I'm not interested in making money in that sense. I'm interested in understanding how it really works. And that makes me very curious about those sorts of things. And I just have an endless appetite for that. And that's something I try to protect. You know, some people have also sort of said, what have you used the money? It's like, I don't have an expensive car. I don't necessarily have something very, I mean, I want to live a life where I'm never afraid of not having enough money, and I'm sort of clamoring on to something and saying, oh, I must be successful. Mostly when people ask me to give a talk about my Lego life, it's a story full of failures. I've made so many mistakes, but I find it very interesting.
So maybe the last question, then again, we'll open it up. You spend your time now across so many different industries and technologies and so on. I'm curious about what excites you the most about the future.
Yeah. I think there's a lot to be concerned about the future. I just want to say that because I'm not naive about that. But I do think that the challenges the world is facing are solvable. And I do see examples of them being solved. So I think it's in our hands, and that gives me tremendous optimism about working on it. And that is what keeps me very optimistic about the future.
Thank you.